Okay, great. Thank you to all three of you. I just want to pose one question before we get into those of the journalists, some of whom are already raising their questions. It would seem like the thread here is, Africa is where it is because of colonialism and the historical injustices that we have seen over hundreds of years, which is what puts us in this disadvantaged position, including, matters like climate change, where Africa is the least contributor, but bears the biggest brunt of the effects of climate change. Understood. We're talking about changing the structure, Theo, like you say, with respect to that, and being the rule maker. So my question is, how do you position Africa as the rule maker, or how do you even begin to change the structures of these organizations like the IMF and the World Bank when we are not the ones that pay the piper? The US is the biggest shareholder in IMF and World Bank. President Trump has repeatedly said, including in 2018 in Buenos Aires, that he was thinking or contemplating abolishing the IMF. It is probably going to come on his radar, if it isn't already, with his Project 2025 right now. Truth be told, Africa isn't funding the IMF, the World Bank. In fact, there's many African countries that still do not pay their contributions to either the African Union, East African Community, SADC, ECOWAS. Think of all of these regional economic blocs. There's many countries that are behind on their payments. How do you change the global financial architecture? Of course, considering past historical injustices that got us here, but when you're not the one, with the money, how does that work going forward? And what does Africa then need to do? I think I'll just ask that one question, and then I'll open it up to the rest, and I can already see their questions in the Q&A box. Who would like to
Okay,
go first?
maybe I'll take it very quickly.
Okay.
Thank you for that very, very important question, Yvonne. Actually, we need to understand two things here. There is the global financial architecture, and there are African responsibilities that we should not ignore. This discussion actually is just part of the problem, right? And for us to actually get to the point where we have that voice, where we can actually have a voice in the table, where we can be the rule maker, I think it starts, with issues of governance, internal governance in Africa. It's very important. In Afro we actually talk about the African Borrowing Charter that should actually guide countries into how they actually borrow in terms of maintaining sustainable debt levels. So issues of internal governance is very important, and actualizing the African Union blueprint. It's very important, starting from the regional economic communities, for us to have a coordinated approach to these problems. And this requires not just the technical inputs, but also the political will to be able to have this blueprint. Because if you look at it, it is quite clear. You see the major economies, the bilateral creditors, they are more coordinated. You hear of the G20, you hear of OECD countries, you hear of the Paris Club. These creditors are even more coordinated, and they are the ones with the resources. They are the ones with the financial resources. They are the ones with the
Did we just lose Theo for a bit?
Yeah, he's frozen on my end.
Yeah, he's frozen. Yeah. Maybe while we get him back, Sarah, do you want to just jump in real quick? Because I saw you nodding your head.
Yes, absolutely. Yvonne, thank you for that really important question. I'll say two framings to that. Theophilus mentioned one framing, which is this issue has two sides. There is the internal African interventions that must be done for us. And someone asked the question, what does cleaning house means? It means African leaders and citizens taking responsibility for the things that we can, how we generate our revenue, how we spend our money. That is, even if we fixed everything happening externally, all the structural barriers that we're bumping into, and they're real, and I'm going to come to them, they're real structural barriers. If we fix 100% of them and we don't clean up the internal African dynamics, we are not going to get ourselves out of this mess. If we fix all of the internal African challenges of how money is spent, whether we can sweat our assets and our revenue, we can't be the richest continent on earth and still be the poorest continent. It's a paradox that confounds even the brightest minds. So clearly there's a problem. And if we are able to sweat our assets and get more revenue, and we don't fix those structural problems, we're still not going to achieve our goals. So I want us to be very clear that this is two sides of one very important coin. The second framing is there's a sequence to this work. Yvonne, you're absolutely right. Africa provides about 2% to global economy, to the global economy, about 2%. Why? We have stubbornly refused to add value to the God-given gifts and talents that are underneath our earth. And until we get a way to, and our African Union leaders, our leaders on the continent must be the driver's seat of this, until we get a way to increase the revenue of our resources, we don't have a chance to make money in the global polity and economic landscape. So I think it's very important, and that's why I really appreciate speaking to journalists, because we have to hold our African leaders' feet to the fire. We have assets. How are we using it? Are we adding value, or are we still exporting our assets for raw products, whether that's cocoa or oil, that we have been doing for the last 60 years when everyone else has added value? Or will we get a chance to say, enough? We need to add value so we can get revenue, so we can play in the global economy. And that is it. That sequence. First, it's revenue, then it's power. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. And then the areas of barriers are, first, as African citizens telling our governments and our leaders, we will not elect you back if you cannot be responsible with our resources. And yes, there's so many challenges and so many areas that conversation can go, but at the very minimum, we must raise our voices to keep the feet to the fire of our leaders. And then secondly, we will continue to tell the global financial structures that our cocoa farmers cannot decide to add value, and then you guys block them and decide that you're not going to buy a cocoa because we've decided to do a wonderful thing by adding value because it's going to be more expensive for you. And that's real. Farmers cannot sell their products externally and compete in the global market because the West subsidized their farmers. So there's many antics that are done to make sure that we cannot add more value and get our product out. So let's be clear. There's two sides of this problem. We must face two sides squarely with a lot of vigor and gusto. And there's a sequence to this challenge. We must address our revenue sources on the continent, then have the voice to start making. And it's a long-term play. And we want to start yesterday, not even now.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think, and I hope that answers Bob Etamiku's question, who said we seem to be over-focusing on the West and how the global financial architecture is not in our favor. Why aren't we focusing as well on some of our very inept leaders who sit on gold, uranium, diamond, and crude oil deposits, yet are unable to harness these resources for the development of our continent? And I think, Sarah, you've addressed that. And perhaps maybe something else to think about, like you talk about, raising the revenue, and then you can have the power to take over or reform the global financial system, which is also adding value. But maybe something else to think about. The AfCFTA provides something, intra-African trade to build at and reduce, the barriers, tariff and non-tariff. So perhaps to do America first, what does Africa first look like? So before we sell our cocoa or chocolate to wherever, can we do it internally? Just food for thought. There is another question here. Adrian, perhaps you can tackle that. And we're still trying to get Theo back online.
Seems like he's back.
Oh, is he? Okay, great. Maybe Theo will come back to you in a minute. I'd like to just engage Adrian on this next one and perhaps everyone else as well. Winston Mwale says, thanks for the great presentations. I would like each of our panelists to explain what would be the best role of the media in advancing the African continent's position on reparative justice. The responses should take into account the fact that the media is multifaceted: radio, TV, online, and print. Adrian, do you want to go first for this one?
Yeah, I'll attempt to take that one, but also maybe start by feeding back into the last question as well. You see, when we speak about the global financial architecture or the global political economy, I think in this context, we've largely focused on the financial architecture, but there are other architectures that still, leave us as underdogs because we came late to the party. I think you had started speaking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and this is probably a response to, the inequalities within the UN World Trade Organization as well, a lot of agreements have been put on the table, most of them being unfair, and they really affect how domestic resources mobilization takes place within the realm of international trade. So it's something important to raise that, why, to some degree, there has been limited value addition either to our minerals, amongst other things. So it's something to put on the table there. But it's also important to take cognizance of the fact that political will is probably needed in the strongest sense, because you realize that the African Union, in its various commissions and departments, has actually came up with an architecture that would govern the finance, the trade, amongst other things, which is a key, step that could have been taken. I think for a lot of people who have heard about the Gaddafi vision, if I can put it that way, United States of Africa, right? You'd see the Africa Finance Corp, the Africa Development Bank, there are institutions that are already there. Currently in Addis at the moment, tomorrow there will be a discussion around the development of the Africa Credit Rating Agency. These are institutions that are meant to ensure that Africa has got its own architecture and can govern and be self-sufficient. But then there are, there is a need to ensure that some institutions are strengthened. Take, for instance, the role of the Pan-African Parliament. It needs to be on the table. It needs to have the authority to, whip in our dear country brothers and sisters to ensure that we are moving in the right direction. The role of the Africa peer review mechanism, right? It needs to have strong checks and balance to ensure that no country is. Right now, we are facing a number of challenges from financial to political. But if those institutions were strong, then there would be, a semblance of direction in terms of who we are, where we should be, and how we self-govern in terms of our own resources. So I thought I should put it up there. We are not short of alternatives, if I can put it that way, but the alternatives that are coming as well could also have their own challenges. Here I'm speaking about the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And a number of African countries are joining the party to ensure that there is an alternative to the global status quo that is bedeviling the region. So it's something to be aware of, and have to push our political leaders to have the political will to ensure that these processes, these alternatives, see the light of the day. Multilateralism, because these institutions were created before a lot of countries gained independence, we joined the party. That's why we're speaking about reform. That's why we're speaking about multilateralism within the UN systems. Either we're talking about tax, about debt, or trade. It's because we've seen the injustices within those institutions, and it's still a justiciable approach to ensure that there is reform there whilst we are working within our own home. And then lastly, with regards to the role of media, I happen to be very biased when I engage with media, having been party to the Afrodad family at some point. I think when I was still in Afrodad, we created what we call the AfroMed initiative, where we have been capacitating, the media in terms of reporting on business or financial issues. I think that's a big role where we saw a little bit of limited capacity in terms of reportage. And we've taken that, even as I'm in a new position, to say, look, the media is the gateway to ensuring that Africans understand the issues that are bedeviling the continent, and various channels can be used. But then we do have accessibility issues. If we speak about energy challenges within the continent, then you can see that dotted line to even issues to with regards to access to even the mainstream radio or TV kind of access. But I think there is a strong movement around online integration, the role of social media, amongst other things, that have basically put citizens having gadgets, pretty much having quick access to information, instant access to information. But then the biggest plea would be to say we need factual information, because now even with social media comes a lot of information that is distorted, and it also kills the narrative around the Africa rulemaker kind of position. Thanks, and over.
Thanks, Adrian. Sarah? And then we'll go to Theo, particularly on the question regarding the role of the media.
Yes, I think.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Theo, welcome back. Just to hang on just a minute. Let's go to Sarah first, and then we'll come to you.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. As Adrian, I'm quite biased to the media because the media sits in the fulcrum between citizens and leaders. And I think the role of the media is really important. Now, there are usually three prongs to developing any society. It's leadership. So it's the government leadership, political leadership. It's the institutions that make sure that a society operates, and it's the voices of the citizens. What we find on the continent sometimes is our leaders will cannibalize those institutions. So the institutions that should have some independence to check the leaders are really in the leader's pocket. So the only real thing we have to pushing for pressure is our citizens' voices. And we can never have citizens' voices until they understand the issues. They can never understand the issues until media explains and brings awareness to issue, whether by radio, social media, text, or all the mediums of media. So that link between awareness and action is so strong. And without the media, we don't have that link. So, and what we're really looking for is until citizens can take action in its numbers, we don't really have a check for government. That's our best and brightest check for government. And so that citizen link for media is very important. Media's ability to break down some of this esoteric topics. We're having a conversation about global financial architecture. If I go on the streets of Nairobi or Kampala or Abuja and ask a person in the market, what's global financial architecture? They'll look at me like, what am I talking about? But if a media personality who can explain to the market woman, explain to my grandmother in the village, or explain to the person who works in an office in MTN or Airtel and say, this is what it means. And importantly, these are the implications for your children and yourself. Then they get engaged. So we really need the media. And then the second reason for the media is for our leaders. As you all know, our leaders want to be, as we do advocacy, one of the big questions we ask is, what paper does this leader read? To put pressure on them, we need to know where their eyes are every day. And our presidents are usually reading a newspaper. They might be on Twitter and the rest, but they're usually reading a newspaper. To the extent that a story makes it on a paper that they read day in, day out, saying, you did this well or you didn't do this well, it catches their attention and it puts their feet to the fire. So I can't overestimate the role of the media. That's why for us at One, when this briefing is very important, and collectively we are all looking for ways to provide more capacity to our media, because without your role, my strong hypothesis is that Africa does not arise to the place she needs to arise without the media doing the work the media should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And just before Theo comes in, I just wanted to acknowledge Lily Njeru's question. She's with the Nation Media Group here in Nairobi. And I think she'd asked you, Sarah, what reorganizing our house would look like, just to clarify that you had answered that question. But Lily's, in case it wasn't clear, you can please feel free to post that again. Before we go to you, Theo, Bob Etemiku says there are several media organizations in Africa working very hard to tell very good stories about Africa with funding from multilateral organizations. This is hurting the narrative on the ground. I suggest that instead of telling mostly positive stories, we tell more balanced, objective, and fair stories. I think that's just a comment to what we're talking about. Theo, do you want to jump in on this one as well? And then I think I have another question in case there's none.
Thank you, Yvonne. I think I don't know where I dropped off on the other question on how to actualize Africa's role, voice, on the global financial system. But I think before I dropped off, I actually indicated that there are issues around coordination that is actually lacking in Africa. I think there are issues around the other creditors who are more coordinated than African countries who are the borrowers. So I think we need to start from that base. If we cannot, we must stop going to them in divided ranks, because that's where the problem actually starts. But then coming to the role of the media, I will pick up from where Adrian left off, mentioning the Afrodat Media Development Initiative, which will be in its 5th edition this year. It's actually to build the capacity of journalists on reporting on these issues. And just to put another layer to what Adrian and Sarah already said regarding this, the media has a very important role, and I'll be very brief about it. you know, when these technical decisions, this technical advocacy issues, technical analysis, when it gets to the end, the next line of action is with the citizens. And the media has a very important role, because I always say that when governments ultimately fail, right, then we pass the relay button to the citizens. When governments fail to listen to our voices as civil society, when they fail in advocacy, right, then the next line of action is with the citizens to actually, you know, make their decisions regarding who should actually be in position of power and who should actually be in a position to actually address their needs. And this is where the media comes in, because it starts with the knowledge, it starts with the awareness, it starts with the understanding. When citizens don't know these issues, they cannot make the right voting decisions, right? And then the media has a very important role, not just in terms of the narratives, but in terms of the ideologies. I can tell you that development is an ideal, it's an idea. Development is not something like it dropped from somewhere or an object. It's actually an ideology. And Africans should not be able, I mean, they should not shy away from their own narratives. We know in the global financial architecture, or within the global political sphere, there are issues around ideologies where some of them are almost like biblical truths to us. Africans should not be afraid to challenge these dominant narratives. And the media has a very important role to play in terms of educating the masses to be able to stand up to that. So they have a key role to play. And of course, this is not just in terms of mainstream media. I think Adrian talked about social media and some misinformation that goes with it, but the rest be told that